So it's been over 2 years now since I left my job and quit my career and embarked on this journey to take control over my life and my family's life. Hi, I'm a 50-year-old Korean man, and I'm feeling a little worried, or quite worried now, because I quit my job about half a year ago. And I quit my job because probably many of you are thinking something similar. You know, you're getting older, not sure if this desk job is what life is cut out to be. You wanted purpose, and you didn't want to go out like that. And I figured it's probably a good time to give an update now as to whether or not I made a huge mistake or not. And the truth is, I actually started this journey way back, actually, not just 2 years ago. I started it about 2016, like 9 years ago, almost a decade ago now, when I left the United States. And the main reason why we left the United States back then was this was right before Trump got elected, Trump 1.0, was that I sincerely thought that America, I had seen peak America, and that there was a lot of turmoil that was inbound and coming into the country, and that it would be a good time to actually move to another country, and that country happened to be Singapore. And there's a lot of reasons besides the language being spoken in Singapore being English, but it's also a very safe country, and I wanted to start preparing for my future. So leaving the United States was not easy, right? As a green card holder and a permanent resident, I found out, and to my surprise, or rather, I shouldn't be surprised really, I was going to get taxed no matter what, right? So I was working in Singapore for a Singaporean company, and guess what? Uncle Sam's still going to come and take his tax money from me. And I thought that was like, what? I'm not even living in the States. Why am I paying U.S. taxes? I'm not even a U.S. citizen. Singapore having a 23% tax cap, meaning you can't get taxed more than 23%, and having zero capital gains tax, and also zero tax on, and actually no controls over gold, was a very friendly place that I thought it would be a good place to go to, along with having starting a family with children with really good education, and so on and so forth. So we made that move back then, and I started accumulating gold back then in preparation for what I was thinking would happen, which was a deterioration in the American empire, essentially, and also a global potential recession slash stagflation, and even potentially a depression, which I wanted to start preparing even back then, 10 years ago, leading into today, right? And we're getting definitely closer to that. And if you've been watching some of my more financial investment related videos, you'll see what my positions are and how I'm thinking about preparing for what's to come. Because nobody really lives longer than 100 years, we tend to forget what mistakes and tragedies we did before and repeat them in future generations. And this is kind of like what I call the generational memory lapse, if you will. For example, nobody alive today actually lived through the Great Depression. Whenever there was a downturn or a sign of a recession, they would just like print more money, or basically lower interest rates, have easy money policy, so that we wouldn't have such a deep recession. And that's been going on for about 30, 40 years now. The problem with that is, because these excesses are never cleaned out, it's like eating a lot of food and never going to the bathroom to take a dump. It's just like stuffing yourself and never going to the toilet. So one needs to be prepared, and your mindset needs to understand that the past era of multiple decades of what has been easy money, meaning borrow money at almost no interest rate to basically, spend and do business on, is gone. But circling back into the most recent move I made, which was to basically like up and out my job. So here's the thing. The way I did it was, I didn't just like walk in one day and quit and up and out resign like that. I actually planned this very carefully over a couple of years. And the first thing I did was I converted my permanent position as, I was leading up health investments for essentially a VC firm in Singapore, to transition into a consultant role where I was still kind of working for them, but now under my own company, and I was being paid as a consultant to, as an advisor essentially to the VC, and work part-time in that sense. So I was still generating income, but at the same time had more flexibility and time to do my other stuff with FoFty, which, if you've been following me and you've been reading some of the stuff that I've been putting out. And that was the way I kind of started the transition. And it was only like earlier this year where I completely ended that and became 100% off any kind of like job or consulting or anything like that, and fully dedicate myself to FoFty. And here's the thing. I thought that, since I had already kind of quit and became a consultant or advisor part-time, that the final cutoff to not being a consultant or advisor and just doing FoFty the full time would be, a small change, because I had already for over a year been used to being a part-timer and consultant, doing a consulting business. And the truth is that last change, from being a paid consultant to full-time doing, FoFty and whatever I want to do, was huge. It was, in fact, it was like 80% of the overall change. So that was a surprise. I thought it was just going to be a small final change into adjusting into a new lifestyle, but the reality was it was the biggest change. And I think a lot of it was psychological, because now you're not getting a steady paycheck day to day from a gig or a contract, and you're totally left to your own. And plus, then my schedule became, I was still going into meetings or some recurring schedule of, repetitive routine. But once that ended, it was just whatever I did, right? And so that change was huge. And so that was, I guess there's one thing I wanted to share with you, is that was an unexpected thing, that the final flip into complete freedom was the biggest change out of everything. The other thing I immediately noticed was that I was spending a lot more time with my family, which I anticipated, and that was one of the whole point, right, was to spend more time with the family. But the amount of time and essentially the joy and benefit I have watching my kids grow up, I pick up my son from school every day, something I would never be able to do in a 9-to-5 job. And the conversations I have with him on how his day went, with his friends and what he's doing at school, and, all these things that I was able to start doing. The first thing I realized was, wow, I missed out on all that when my son was younger. And I kind of regret, in some ways kind of regretted that I didn't see my son grow up. Now, luckily for me, he's only 7. And so he's still a kid, a really young kid. And my daughter is, just turning 3 now. So I didn't really miss too much. But, I guess if I had made this change when they're a lot older, I could only imagine what that would have felt like, right? And the sad thing is, a lot of people don't make this realization until much, much later in life, maybe perhaps after they've turned into adults, and they just kind of miss out on the entire growing up of their children, which I've really come to value as one of the reasons of being alive, honestly. And these are things that money and time won't buy you, is these experiences that you have with your family. In fact, I'm here right now with my parents in Korea. So I'm filming here in Korea. I'm not in Singapore, and the weather here is beautiful, even though it's just starting summer. And the amount of time I get to spend with my parents, who are much older now, is a lot more, right, than if I was so busy doing work and trading off my career basically for essentially my relationships with my family. And, now that I get to see it while I'm still not too old and still have some runway, I really have embraced how much value that it brings to essentially life, right? And what really matters before I get too old or get too late and can't undo things and go back in time to change things. So those are like the main benefits I've come across and that I really cherish after making the change. It's not something new for me to start and quit a 9-to-5 corporate job and do your own startup. I've done startups in the past. I moved to Silicon Valley, did all that, and then I helped a lot of founders in Singapore building accelerators and investment programs. So it's not a new thing to me. But what I found out was the startup life was, there's still a runway of things you had to follow, right? There was a pathway no different than going to school, than starting as a junior analyst and moving your way up the ranks into a portfolio manager or a senior manager and then an executive. All these things, there was a similar track for startup people. You had to, as a founder, create value and then go for pre or seed money and then get like Series A. Then after Series A, have a board and go to Series B, Series C, and then IPO if you're lucky. It was another basically track, different from corporate, but nevertheless a track. So you were still on this like hamster wheel trying to get to the next stage, and that was all you're focused on in life. Albeit that, some people have a purpose and reason behind what they're doing with their startup, but nevertheless, it was still a hamster wheel that you were on, right? Whereas now, there is no more hamster wheel. There's no path that you must follow. The only path that I'm following right now is what is in front of me. And that's a completely different thing. And that is a definition of owning and taking control of life, right? Nobody's dictating to you what you need to do next. There is no hurdle or next stage, if you will, like a game, where after you defeat the boss of level 1, then you go into level 2 and try and defeat the boss in level 2 before you get to level 3. There's none of that anymore. There's a complete control over reality and your consciousness and life, and the simulation that we call, reality around us. It really folds into what you want to make it. And that is perhaps the greatest, most powerful thing. I can't even describe into words how uplifting and life-changing and mind-changing that is, from all the ways that I used to live before, from corporate world to startup world and everything in between as a student. This is truly the end game, is where you get to set what you need to do and what needs to happen by when. And you internally finally get to set your own expectations of what you think success is, not have anybody else in this planet opine into what expectations that you should meet are. It's purely self-created and self-attested to. And I think that is the single most important thing and most empowering and uplifting thing that I can share with you that I've come across since making the leap into where I am today. Ever since we were born, we've been so ingrained by society on the path that we must take. And there's the corporate path that we must take, there's the academic path we must take. And even if you break out and become an entrepreneur, there's the startup or small business path that you need to take. And all these paths are predetermined and preset. And there's nothing that you can do when you're in that path except just follow through, because if you fall off that path, then supposedly your life will be over. I mean, you would be a failure and everything would collapse around you and it would just be utter despair. And that's the biggest lie, right? That's the biggest lie. But we are accustomed and we've been basically brainwashed into thinking that that is a truth. Even though we see examples, pockets of examples where people don't go on those, hamster wheels, and we always wonder, like, how are they able to do it? Or I wish I could be them. Or they're just one in a million success stories. That's not really how it works. But the reality is, the success is not determined by how much money you make or how many titles you have or if you change the world, but really determined internally, meaning, are you fulfilled in your life? Right? What does that mean? Have you found yourself? Do you know who the self is? And these things, there's no, superficial or material value you can place in. These are things that only you can assess. And unluckily for most of us, that assessment comes in way too late, as in when we're on our deathbeds. And you can't go back in time and undo things. And by then it's too late. And so the sooner you learn, right, that these paths that have been laid out by society, and these paths you can understand is made to bear in civilization because it's just a mechanical numbers game. It's like, when you drop those balls and it falls, you want to have a pathway so the balls to get down, right? So from a controlling and civilization management point of view, if you want to call it that, absolutely makes sense. But if you're the ball, right, that doesn't necessarily happen, and that's not necessarily the way life should unfold for you. And so the main, change that people must make first is the acceptance and understanding that the pathway that they've been brainwashed to believe is the only way out there is actually an untruth, and probably one of the biggest lies that have been sold to you since you were a kid. And sad to say, most people, not all, but most people, don't ever make that realization their entire life. They will live an entire life not understanding. Then there are some people who will make that realization when it's too late, meaning at their deathbed, and then they have the regrets, as I described with Bronnie Ware, the top regrets of the dying. And then there are some people who make that realization earlier in life with enough time left in order to take action and actually correct that perception and pursue things that in the end will give them that fulfillment of what they're supposed to do in life, so that they're very satisfied, right, when their time comes. And that is the ultimate test. That is not what people say, not what people are comparing you to. Did you do this? Did you buy that house? Did you have this car? Do you have that job title? And all that stuff. That is not what you're going to be thinking about when your time comes. What you're going to be thinking about when your time comes is, did you use your time in your life to fulfill yourself with people around you, so that when time does come, there is no regret. And that is the ultimate test that you're going to have in your lifetime. Now, obviously, we live in a world where material needs are required. We need cash to pay for my children's education, food, and roof over their head, and all this matters. So it's not like I'm turning into a hermit and abandoning, civilization and living in a cave with my family. No, absolutely not. But the difference is, I know when enough is enough. So do I have enough to send them to a great school and feed them good and healthy food and put a nice shelter and roof above their heads? Anything more than that is just a pissing contest of, and I've seen it, right? And I've done it in many industries, from tech to investments to startups. I've seen the peaks of each one of those domains, and I've looked at the mountaintops there, and I realized I don't understand what the more will bring except for ego and bragging rights. I mean, after your second or third house, or your first or second, like, Ferrari, or boat even, if you want to go all the way out, what is the point besides, how much more caviar in first class are you going to eat till, does it really taste that much better? I don't think so. So as long as the base needs are met in a comfortable life, anything else is superfluous. And spending all your time and energy to chase more and more of that could better be devoted and channeled to spending time with developing your family and other more important things in life, your health, your mental well-being, your mental state, and your soul and spirit. These things, devoting it into those areas, I find much more important and fulfilling than just chasing more and more money and titles, executive this, CEO that. And I've seen the tops of all those, and it's an empty top. I know people who are in these positions, and it's an empty place to be if you get to the top, which most people don't. But even if you get there, you find out that it wasn't all that was cracked up to be and what was sold to you as the goal in life. That is not the goal in life, or at least not for me. And so having, eschewed that and going into this, there's still income streams that I can generate, right, through my investments, for example. And that's a purely money-making thing that generates income on the side, enough for me to provide the base needs in a comfortable way. And that's all that matters. The rest is devoting time to helping people like yourselves, other people who might be in similar situations or boat as I am in, and telling them that there is an alternative way possible and that this is the way you can go, and how much more fulfilling and meaningful life becomes when you make that change and essentially unshackle yourself from the system that you're a serf and have serfdom too, right? Because you're just a slave to the system, and they tell you that there's no way outside of the system. You go outside the system, it's failure and misery. And I'm here to tell you that that's absolutely not the case. And in fact, the reverse is true, is that if you get out of the system and you're able to succeed outside of the system, it is infinitely more emancipating and fulfilling. And I'll use the word happiness, although I don't think the pursuit of happiness is the purpose of life. Happiness is a byproduct of pursuing a greater good in life, which is a whole nother episode I can talk about. But you also will be fulfilled and happy. Yes, that is a byproduct as well. One of the most powerful things is the understanding that you can actually fold reality, or the simulation, so that you can succeed in whatever you choose to do. I've done so many different things in my life and succeeded at them, from being a tech person to a startup guy to an investor, and so on and so forth. It really doesn't matter, right? What matters is your willingness and desire to achieve and accomplish something, and then really doubling down on that and putting in the effort and the resilience to accept failures along the way. And whatever you choose to do in that sense, you can succeed. It's just a question of how much do you want it. I know that sounds simple, but that's ultimately the way to, if we want to call it, manifest reality. Now, we're not talking about changing the laws of physics, putting flying cars or anything like that, but we're talking about how to yourself from inside out put in the effort because of some desire you have to attain something, and then doubling down and having the resilience to see that through, whatever that thing is, that is how you kind of fold the simulation or reality. Because what you'll end up doing is you'll end up having the vision to see things that you didn't see before, but you pick up now because you're so focused and your awareness level is so heightened on achieving that thing that you want to do, that you'll see more things. And then when you do see something that before would have not been something you would have seen, and this is what people will say is luck. It's not luck. It's you have an increased vision because of your heightened sense of awareness, that then you will be able to see opportunities. And then comes the question, once you see the opportunity, do you have the chutzpah or the kahunas to take action? And this is the second step, right? And if you're really committed, you will have the chutzpah and the gumption, if you want to call it that, to take action, even if it seems risky or is scary. But that you know that this is the thing that if you don't take action now, this is like the Jeff Bezos, the regret minimization framework, that you would regret not taking that action in the future, so regardless of the outcome, you will take the action. And then once you take the action as the third step, which is the final one, is having the resilience to see it through. So you took action, you're trying it, but you just don't give up on the first sign of failure or challenges or difficulty. And you have the resilience to stick it out and continue through, even through there's pain, there's all kinds of issues, but you stick it out and follow through, and having that resilience is the third step. And if you do these three steps where you have the vision, you have the gumption, and you have the resilience to follow through, no matter what you choose to do, whatever it is, you will be capable of succeeding. And that success can come outside of the system and outside of the serfdom that most people are placed into. And so, looking back, I said, in one of my videos earlier, am I a bad father for taking this risk at this age when I have young children I need to care for and put to school and feed and everything like that? And what if I fail? And the conclusion I had back then was, well, at least what I'm preaching to my kids, which is to really go for what you believe in, because that's the whole point in life. You don't want to be a soulless slave to a system. What's the point of living then? And showing them that I live actually in the way that I'm preaching and teaching them, that when they grow up, no matter what happens, they'll at least know that their father stayed true to what they were being taught by him, and he stuck to his principles, and for better or for worse, did his best. And that was the best way that he could teach his children the meaning and purpose of pursuing your own ideas and your own life, and not be stuck to a system and be a slave to it, which is the most tragic thing. The worst is when you're stuck in the system and enslaved by it, and they've brainwashed you to the point where you don't even know that you are a serf to the system, right? You actually think that it's actually a good thing. And it's only when you are pulled out from it, and then when you're looking then from outside in, do you see what really is going on. But then a lot of times it's too late. You're either really sick in bed, about to pass away, or time has passed and you can't undo because you can't go back in time. And so these are the situations which I'm hoping through the videos I create and what I write and what I'm sharing in sessions I have to avoid, right? And that's the whole point of doing this. Surely not to make money through this channel. Like, there's no way, there's no money in this. I'm not a life coach. I don't want to make money as a coach. I'm not making money off YouTube videos. I make money through a pure money-making scheme, which is investing. So let money be made in the money-making way, which is to invest, right? And that's how I'm generating some of the income on the side, enough to, provide, right? Which is, again, like I said, what really matters. And anything more, the effort is spent on talking to people like you and showing you that there are ways outside of the system that actually is a better way when you look back in life in totality and ask yourself, did you live a fulfilling life or not? So having said that, the answer is a resounding no. I do not regret it. It was not a mistake. In fact, I still maintain it is the best thing that I've done in my life so far. So having said that, I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.